It was the kind of night that felt normal, deceptively so. I sat across the dinner table, my eyes scanning the face of the man I thought I knew. We were having a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us, or so I thought. But then came the words, casually thrown in between bites of steak and sips of wine, words that would shatter the calm, words that would change everything. "So, I've been seeing someone else." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an apology. It was just a statement, a blunt revelation served up as if it were nothing more than an afterthought. My fork hovered mid-air, the clink of the silverware still echoing in the air as I stared at him in disbelief. I thought I misheard him, but no. There it was, bold as day, hanging in the air between us like a poisonous cloud. He wasn't even looking at me when he said it. His eyes were fixed on his plate, his mouth still chewing, as if he were talking about the weather or some mundane task he had planned for the weekend. He spoke so nonchalantly about it, as though it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, a sudden rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. I had to keep it together. But inside, something was breaking. How could he say it like that? How could he sit across from me and brag about something so intimate, so damaging? He wasn't even trying to hide it. It wasn't an accident, no slip of the tongue, it was intentional, a challenge, a slap in the face. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mind raced, my heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't let any of it show. I was good at controlling my emotions, at keeping them hidden beneath the surface. But this was different. This was a betrayal so raw, so deliberate, that it felt like a knife to my gut. I wanted to scream, to throw the plate across the room, to demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. I stared at him, my gaze icy, every muscle in my body taut as I fought to maintain my composure. He finally glanced up, meeting my eyes for the first time since the words left his mouth. There was no guilt in his expression, no shame. Just a cool indifference, as if this was something he was entirely entitled to do. As if I should just accept it and move on. "You're not mad?" he asked, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. "I thought you'd be a little more upset." I let the silence hang between us for a few moments longer, the tension thick enough to slice. The sound of my heartbeat was deafening in my ears. He had to know by now that I wasn't just going to let this slide, right? There was no way I would sit here, calmly eating dinner like everything was fine, after he'd just confessed to an affair in the most casual way possible. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice cold and measured, the calmest I could make it. "No, I'm not mad," I said. "I'm not mad at all." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest as I studied him, the truth of his betrayal sinking in slowly. "But I think you're about to be." His eyes narrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" I smiled, slowly, deliberately, my gaze never leaving his face. "I mean that I'm going to teach you a lesson. A lesson you won't forget." He looked at me, disbelief flickering in his eyes for the first time since the conversation began. But it was too late. He had already crossed the line, and there was no going back now. He had no idea what was coming next. It's strange how quickly everything can change. One minute, you're sitting there, thinking you know exactly where you stand, and the next, the ground beneath you shifts. It's almost like a slow-motion car crash, you can see it happening, but you can't stop it. That's how it felt when he casually revealed the affair, like a piece of glass shattering, the pieces flying in every direction. The hardest part was that I'd suspected something for a while. There were signs. Little things, shifts in behavior, late-night phone calls, the odd text message that seemed to be just a little too secretive. But I'd pushed the doubts aside. I wanted to believe that I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking things. I trusted him. I wanted to trust him. But now? Now, there was no denying it. The truth was out, and there was no more pretending. No more turning a blind eye. I could feel a simmering rage growing inside me, but I wasn't going to let it boil over. Not yet. I had learned the hard way that letting emotions control your actions in situations like this only led to more chaos. No, I was going to be smart. I was going to take control of the situation, make him see exactly what he had done, and show him the consequences of treating me like a fool. I stood up from the table and walked over to the wine cabinet, pouring myself a glass. I needed something to steady my nerves, something to calm the storm inside me before I did what I knew needed to be done. I could feel him watching me, probably wondering what was going through my head, what my next move would be. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked after a moment, his voice dripping with a hint of amusement. "No," I replied, my voice steady, my eyes locked onto his. "I'm not going to say anything. Not yet." I took a slow sip of my wine, watching him squirm as the minutes passed in tense silence. He wasn't used to me being this composed. He wasn't used to me being in control. "You're really not mad?" he asked again, this time with a slight edge in his voice. "No," I said, setting my glass down with a quiet click. "I'm not mad. But I will be, if you don't learn some humility." He raised an eyebrow at that, clearly intrigued. "Humility? You want me to apologize, is that it?" I smiled again, a cold, knowing smile. "It's not about an apology. It's about respect." His expression faltered for a brief second, before he recovered. "I'm not the one who needs to learn respect here," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "I thought you'd be more understanding." Understanding? Understanding? How could I possibly understand this? How could I possibly respect someone who would so casually throw away everything we had for the sake of an affair? I wasn't just his partner, I was his confidant, his supporter, his equal. But in that moment, he had reduced me to a mere afterthought, something disposable, something easy to disregard. I took a step toward him, my eyes narrowing. "You think this is a game, don't you? You think you can just do whatever you want, and I'll still be here, waiting, forgiving you without a second thought." His smug smile faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously. It's not like that, okay? I still care about you." I wasn't buying it. His words meant nothing now. Nothing could undo the damage he had done. Nothing could erase the feeling of betrayal that was burning inside me. "I don't want your apologies," I said coldly. "What I want is for you to understand that you crossed a line. And there are consequences." He laughed, clearly still not taking me seriously. "Consequences? What are you going to do? Throw me out?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked over to the living room and picked up the framed photo of us from the shelf, the one from our trip to Paris. It had been one of our favorite memories together, a moment frozen in time that I thought we both cherished. But now, it felt like a distant memory, something that had been tainted beyond repair. I turned back to him, holding the photo out for him to see. "Do you remember this?" I asked, my voice quiet now, controlled. "Do you remember when we took this picture? When we made promises to each other, when you told me I was the one? Do you remember when you said we'd be together forever?" He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could speak. "No. You don't get to speak yet," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You need to understand the gravity of what you've done. The betrayal you've inflicted. You think you can just waltz in here, casually drop a bombshell on me, and expect everything to stay the same. But I'm not the same woman I was when we took that picture. And neither are you." I let the words sink in, watching the color drain from his face as the reality of the situation hit him. "This isn't about an apology," I continued, "and it's not about forgiveness. It's about making you realize just how much you've messed up. And I'm going to make sure you never forget it." He finally stood up, his face flushed with frustration and anger. "I don't know what your problem is, but this is getting ridiculous." I didn't flinch. "Oh, you'll see soon enough. You'll learn the hard way that actions have consequences." The storm was coming, and he had no idea just how powerful it was going to be. But I was ready. Ready to show him that humility wasn't something you learned overnight, it was something you earned. And for him, that was going to take a lot more than a simple apology. The silence hung between us like a heavy fog, suffocating everything in its path. I could see the way he was trying to regain control of the situation, trying to find the words to convince me that everything would be okay. But it was too late for that. He had crossed the line, and no amount of charming words could take that back. I could see the confusion and frustration growing in his eyes, and it was almost comical how he hadn't yet realized that he was the one who had made the mess. He still thought he could talk his way out of this, still believed that his usual tactics would work on me. But he had underestimated how far I was willing to go to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice steady but laced with contempt. "You think I'm going to let you walk all over me because you're sorry, but that's not how this works. You made a choice, and now you'll deal with the consequences." I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes, just for a split second. The mask he'd been wearing, the confident, untouchable version of himself, was slipping. He knew I wasn't backing down. And that terrified him. "So what do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low and strained. "Do you want me to beg? To apologize over and over again?" I shook my head, a slow smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "I don't want your apologies," I said, each word deliberate. "I want you to learn what it feels like to be disrespected, to have someone treat you as if you're invisible, just like you did to me." His eyes widened, and I could tell he was starting to understand. But it was too late to take it back now. "You know," I said, walking slowly toward him, "I've spent so much time making excuses for you, convincing myself that you weren't that person. That you wouldn't betray me like this. But now, I see you for who you really are. And I'm done making excuses." I could see the guilt creeping into his eyes now, and I knew I had him where I wanted him. But it wasn't enough for me to just have him feel guilty. I needed him to experience the humiliation, the emotional slap, the way he had made me feel. I needed him to understand just how much power he had lost. He took a step back, raising his hands defensively. "Look, I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said, his voice suddenly softer, almost pleading. "I was confused, okay? I never meant to hurt you." "Don't tell me about your confusion," I snapped, my voice growing harder. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't insult my intelligence." I could see his jaw tighten, his anger rising as the realization dawned on him. He had pushed me too far, and now he was starting to realize that I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But it wasn't just anger I saw in his eyes. There was something else, a flicker of fear, a recognition that he had underestimated me. And that fear was what would make this lesson stick. "I want you to understand something," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You don't get to treat me like this and then expect everything to go back to normal. You don't get to destroy what we had and think it can be fixed with a few nice words. You can't just sweep it under the rug and pretend like it never happened." His face grew pale, and for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. He was beginning to realize that there was no easy way out of this. "You'll never be able to undo what you've done," I continued, taking a step closer to him. "But you're going to learn just how much it hurts to be the one who's been disrespected. And you're going to remember this night for the rest of your life." There was no turning back now. The game had begun, and he was the one who had called the first move. The next few days were a blur. He kept trying to call, kept sending me messages, trying to apologize in every possible way he knew. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. His words meant nothing to me now. Actions spoke louder than apologies, and he had already shown me what he was capable of. I ignored him. For the first time in our relationship, I completely shut him out. No texts, no calls, no visits. I focused on myself, on doing the things that made me feel strong and empowered. I spent time with friends, I took care of myself in ways I hadn't in a long time. It wasn't about moving on from him yet. No, it was about reminding myself that I didn't need him to be happy. I had my own life, my own strength. But then, 3 days later, he showed up unannounced. I had just finished a workout and was lounging on the couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard the knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and immediately, I knew who it was. My heart raced a little, not out of anxiety, but because I knew this would be the moment I would finally put him in his place. This was the point of no return. I opened the door, and there he stood, looking disheveled and a little desperate. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, and his eyes, those eyes, held a hint of guilt, but also an edge of defiance, as if he were ready to fight for his place in my life again. He didn't even say hello. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice strained. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I know I messed up. I don't know how to fix this." I crossed my arms, standing in the doorway, watching him for a moment before responding. "No," I said, my voice firm. "There's nothing to talk about. You've already made your choice. And now it's my turn to make mine." I watched as the words sank in, as he realized that this wasn't a conversation he could win by simply pleading his case. His face fell, a flicker of frustration crossing his features, but I didn't let it faze me. I had no intention of giving him an inch. "I want you to understand something," I said, my tone calm but cutting. "You can't just waltz back into my life because you feel guilty. You think you can just apologize and everything will go back to normal, but that's not how this works. Not anymore." His expression faltered as he tried to find the right words. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now, but still full of that same arrogance. "I just made a mistake." I shook my head. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And now you have to live with that choice." I stepped back, closing the door gently in his face before he could say another word. I didn't need to hear any more of his excuses. I didn't need him to explain himself. I had heard it all before, and it had never changed anything. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely in control. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need him to validate me. I had learned the hard way that self-respect didn't come from someone else's words, it came from within. And as I stood there, watching him through the peephole as he slowly turned and walked away, I realized that I didn't need him to teach me anything anymore. I had learned everything I needed to know about him. And now, it was time for him to learn about me. The lesson had only just begun. The days following his visit felt surreal, like I had stepped into a version of my life I never thought I'd inhabit. I could feel the power dynamics shifting. Before, it was always him in control, his charm, his words, his ability to talk his way out of any situation. But now? Now, it was different. I had control, and I wasn't afraid to use it. Every message he sent, every call he made, I ignored. The silence between us was deafening to him, but for me, it was liberating. There was something strangely satisfying about being the one who held the upper hand. For once, I didn't feel like I was scrambling for answers or validation. He had laid it all out there, and I was the one who decided where we went from here. It wasn't long before I heard through mutual friends that he was still seeing her, the other woman. The affair wasn't over, not by a long shot. He hadn't even tried to end things with her. It seemed that he was content to juggle both relationships, pretending that everything could go back to normal with me while still keeping his mistress on the side. And that's when it hit me, the lesson he needed to learn wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about putting things back together. It was about making him understand that I wasn't just going to roll over and accept his behavior. No, this was about making sure he never took me for granted again. One afternoon, I received a text from him, simple and to the point. "Can we talk? I want to make this right." I read it, my lips curling into a smirk. It was almost laughable how he thought he could make things right with a few more words. Words were meaningless now. I had learned that the hard way. I put the phone down, not even bothering to respond. Instead, I focused on what came next, the part where I'd make him regret ever thinking he could get away with what he had done. The plan was simple. I was going to make him face the consequences of his actions, not through an argument, not through pleading, but through his own realization. I wanted him to understand the depth of the damage he'd done, and for that, I needed to take control of the situation in a way he would never expect. I started by sending him an invitation to an event, a casual dinner, something innocuous, nothing that would tip him off to what was about to happen. The catch was that I didn't just invite him. I invited her too. I knew he'd never expect that. I knew he thought he could keep his double life a secret from me, that I wouldn't find out. But he hadn't accounted for the fact that I was paying attention now. He hadn't realized that I was far more capable of gathering information than he gave me credit for. The invitation was as simple as the rest of my plan. Hey, it's been a while, and I think we should all get together. Dinner at mine next Friday. I'd love to catch up. It took him a few hours to reply, and when he finally did, his message was hesitant, almost confused. Wait, are you inviting her too? I let the message hang there for a moment before replying, of course. Why wouldn't I? I could almost feel his tension through the screen, the unease that settled in. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but I could tell he was scrambling for a way to respond. But he did. The reply came through, much slower this time. Okay. I'll be there. I knew he'd come. He had no choice. He was so wrapped up in his own sense of entitlement that he didn't even realize what was about to happen. But he would. Soon enough. Friday night arrived, and everything was set. I had prepared a beautiful dinner, one that would make anyone feel welcome, one that would make him think everything was normal. But beneath the surface, the air was thick with tension, crackling with the energy of the storm that was about to hit. When he walked in, I could see the confusion on his face. His eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, I thought he might actually turn around and leave. But then he saw her, the woman he'd been seeing behind my back. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine as if nothing was amiss, a slight smile playing on her lips. I watched him stiffen as he took in the scene, the realization slowly dawning on him that this was no casual dinner. I had set a trap, and he had walked right into it. Hey, he said, his voice sounding strained as he walked further into the room. I wasn't expecting this. I offered a small, knowing smile, keeping my voice cool. I thought it'd be nice for us all to catch up, I said, as if I hadn't just spent the last few days preparing this exact moment. Why don't you grab a seat? He hesitated for just a second, before sitting down, shooting glances back and forth between me and the woman on the couch. I could see the panic in his eyes now, the weight of his choices starting to sink in. He wasn't in control anymore. She, of course, was playing the part of the oblivious, unbothered mistress, sitting there like everything was fine, but I could see the tension in her posture too. She was nervous, just like him. They both knew this was a powder keg waiting to explode, and all I had to do was light the match. I poured the wine, keeping my movements casual, while inside, my heart was racing. This was it. This was the moment I had been planning for. I wasn't just going to confront him about the affair, I was going to make him experience the full weight of his actions. He wasn't going to be able to talk his way out of this one. So, I said, as I set the wine bottle down with a soft thud, I've been thinking a lot about our situation lately. And I realize there's something I need to make very clear. He looked at me, his eyes now wide with uncertainty, but he didn't speak. He was waiting for me to go on, for me to make the first move. First, I continued, I'm not angry. I'm not here to yell or cry or beg. I'm past that. What I'm here for is to show you exactly how much you've taken for granted. The room went completely still. Even she stopped pretending to read her magazine and looked up, her eyes flickering between us. She didn't know what was coming. Hell, neither did he. You thought you could get away with this, I said, my voice growing stronger now, full of purpose. You thought that I would just sit here and forgive you, that I would sweep this under the rug because you said you're sorry. But here's the thing, you're not the one who gets to decide how this ends. I do. I paused, watching as the tension built between the three of us. He was frozen, his face flushed with panic, and I could see his fingers twitching, as though he was trying to figure out how to fix everything, how to explain away his behavior. But I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. The damage was done. I want you to look at her, I said, turning to the woman on the couch. I want you to look at her, and then I want you to think about how easily you replaced me. How easily you decided that I wasn't enough anymore, that you could juggle both of us, that you could hurt me and expect me to just keep going along with it. His gaze flickered to her and then back to me, and I could see the regret in his eyes. The fear. The realization that he had never truly known me at all. And it was too late to change that. Tonight, I said, the weight of the moment hanging between us, you're going to see exactly what it feels like to be on the other side of this. You're going to experience the humiliation, the pain, the realization that you lost everything, and that no apology will ever make up for it. I gave a small smile, knowing that the lesson had finally begun. And this time, he was going to learn it well. The air in the room thickened, the tension almost unbearable as I stared at him, watching his face contort with the realization of just how far I had gone to expose the truth. It wasn't about yelling, it wasn't about dramatic confrontations, this was a slow burn. And it was exactly what he needed to understand the depth of his betrayal. He sat there, frozen for a moment, his eyes shifting between me and the woman he had chosen over me. His jaw tightened, the weight of my words settling in. This wasn't just an awkward dinner. This was a reckoning. The woman on the couch shifted uncomfortably, her previous smugness slipping, replaced by something closer to guilt or maybe fear. She didn't know what was coming, but I could see it in her eyes, she knew this wasn't going to end well for anyone. I didn't break the silence. Instead, I let it hang there, like a pressure cooker ready to explode. I could feel him squirming, and I knew he was trying to find the words to defend himself, to justify his actions. But the truth was, there was no defense. There was no excuse for what he had done. And tonight, I wasn't going to let him off the hook. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tinged with desperation. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just got caught up. I didn't want to lose you. I shook my head, my expression cold. You didn't just get caught up, I said, each word slicing through the air. You made a choice. You chose her over me. You chose to betray me. And now, you're trying to rewrite the narrative. You think saying you're sorry will fix everything, but it doesn't work that way. I saw his throat tighten as he swallowed hard. He wasn't used to me being this firm, this unyielding. Before, he always had a way of sweet-talking his way out of things, always knowing the right words to soften the blow. But I wasn't buying it anymore. You think I'm just going to forgive you because you're sorry? You think I'm going to believe that you didn't mean to hurt me when you've been carrying on this affair for months? You didn't think about me when you were lying to my face. You didn't think about the person you promised to love, to cherish, to be faithful to. I could see him shrinking under the weight of my words, his confident facade cracking. This wasn't the woman he was used to. This wasn't the woman who had been willing to look past his flaws and forgive him over and over again. This was a new side of me, one he had never seen before. The woman beside him shifted again, her discomfort palpable. She glanced at him, then at me, and I could see her trying to figure out what role she was supposed to play in all of this. Was she supposed to defend him? Apologize? I didn't care. She was just as complicit in this betrayal as he was, and tonight, she wasn't going to be spared either. You think she's the answer? I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. Do you think running to her will solve everything? That you can have your cake and eat it too, while I just sit here and accept it? No. You've made your choices, and now it's time to face the consequences. I turned my gaze to the woman, locking eyes with her. Her discomfort was obvious now. She wasn't as bold as she had been before, wasn't as sure of herself. I could see the shift in her attitude. She was beginning to realize that her role in this wasn't as innocent as she might have thought. You've been living a lie, I said, addressing both of them. The truth is, neither of you thought this through. You thought you could play both sides, keep things hidden, and I'd just go on like everything was fine. But now you're both sitting here, exposed, and there's nowhere to run. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to hear any more of his justifications. He'd had his chance. He'd had all the chances in the world, and he'd thrown them away. So now, I was going to make him feel it. I was going to make sure he knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything. You want to know what the worst part is? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. The worst part is that you thought you could get away with it. You thought you could tear me down, humiliate me, and then come crawling back when you were done. But guess what? I'm not the one who's been humiliated. I'm not the one who's been living a lie. You are. His face went pale, and I saw it, the crack in his armor. He was realizing, too late, that he had underestimated me. He had thought I was weak, that I wouldn't have the strength to stand up for myself. But I wasn't weak. I was done being his doormat. I was done letting him think he could control the situation. You didn't just hurt me, I continued, leaning in, my words sharp. You hurt yourself too. You've shown me who you really are, and now, there's no going back from that. I won't let you manipulate me again. I won't let you destroy my life just because you're too selfish to think about anyone but yourself. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the sound of his breathing. I could see his chest rise and fall, his mind racing, trying to process everything that was happening. But he wasn't going to be able to fix this. Not tonight. Not ever. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost pleading. Please, don't do this. I never wanted to hurt you. But it was too late. He had already done the damage. His words didn't carry the weight they once did. His apologies, his excuses, meant nothing now. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, was gone. And in his place, there was just a hollow shell of someone who had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he wasn't capable of the love and loyalty I had once believed he could give me. I'm done, I said, my voice cold and final. You've made your choice. And now, I'm making mine. He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and regret, but I wasn't moved. He wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. He wasn't going to get off easy. I had spent too long making excuses for his behavior, pretending that things would get better, that he would change. But now, I realized something, he wasn't going to change. And I wasn't going to wait around for him to do it. I turned away from him, signaling that the conversation was over. He didn't deserve any more of my time. He didn't deserve another moment of my attention. But before I could walk away, I turned back to face him one last time. You want to fix things? Then start by fixing yourself, I said. Because I'm not going to be here when you do. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving him sitting there, alone with his choices, his mistakes, and the woman he had thought would be his answer. But there was no answer for him. Not anymore. I had learned my lesson. And now, it was his turn to learn his. The next few days were a blur. I was riding on a wave of empowerment, every step I took feeling like a victory. I had confronted him, laid everything out in front of him, and I had walked away without a second thought. There was no guilt, no regret, just clarity. I had done what I needed to do. I had shown him exactly what it meant to betray me, to think he could have everything he wanted without consequence. But that didn't mean it was over. No, the fallout was still to come, and I wasn't naive enough to believe he was just going to accept it and move on. He wasn't built that way. He was used to getting what he wanted, and now that I had turned the tables on him, I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. I wasn't surprised when the first message came through. "I've been thinking. We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a few moments, a mixture of indifference and curiosity flooding over me. What was there left to talk about? He had said everything he needed to say, and I had already made my decision. But I knew him. I knew he wasn't going to let this go. Not without at least trying to turn the tide back in his favor. I ignored it. Then came the second message, this time with more urgency. "I'm sorry. I made a huge mistake. Please, let's talk." I could almost hear the desperation in his words, and for a moment, I wondered if he actually meant it. But then I reminded myself of everything that had led up to this moment, the lies, the cheating, the manipulation. No. He was sorry because he was losing control. He wasn't sorry because he had hurt me. The third message came a few hours later. "I'm coming over. I don't care if you're mad. We need to talk. Face to face." That one, I couldn't ignore. He had crossed the line. He was crossing into territory I wasn't going to allow him to walk through, and this time, I wasn't going to play the role of the victim anymore. I was done being on the receiving end of his manipulation. I opened my front door, and sure enough, there he stood. His face was drawn, his expression one of someone who had been awake for days, trying to figure out how to fix something that couldn't be fixed. His eyes were red, his clothes wrinkled, and he looked every bit the part of someone who had realized just how badly he had messed up. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice sounding defeated, almost apologetic. I didn't invite him in. Instead, I folded my arms across my chest and gave him a look that said everything I needed to say. "Talk? About what? You've said it all already. You've done enough talking for a lifetime." His eyes flickered with guilt, and I could see him struggling to find the words, but nothing was coming out. He was used to controlling conversations, to being the one who dictated the terms, but that wasn't the reality anymore. I was in control now. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice cracking. "I messed up. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until it was too late." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to mock him for his sudden realization, but I didn't. I wasn't going to let him off the hook so easily. "You didn't realize? Really? After everything we've been through, you didn't realize?" He looked down, his shoulders sagging as the weight of my words landed on him. He had no defense. No way to explain away his actions. He couldn't fix it by apologizing anymore. I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said again, his voice so low it was barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, you did," I snapped. "You hurt me, and now you're reaping the consequences. There's no going back from this. You can't just erase what you did." He took a step toward me, his eyes pleading, but I stepped back, holding my ground. "Please," he said, his voice desperate. "I'll do anything. I'll make it right. Just tell me what to do." I could see the panic rising in him, the realization that he couldn't charm his way out of this, couldn't buy his way out of it. There was no fixing this with sweet words or grand gestures. He had already made his choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. "You can't fix this," I said, my voice cold. "You've already shown me who you are. You can't unhurt me, and you can't undo the damage. All your promises now mean nothing." His face fell, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy for him. Almost. But then I remembered everything he had done to me, everything he had put me through. He had lost my respect, and now he was paying the price. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, his voice hollow. "I just want a chance to prove to you that I can change." "You've had your chance," I replied, shaking my head. "And you blew it. There's nothing left to fix. It's over." The finality of my words seemed to hit him harder than anything else I could have said. He stood there, rooted to the spot, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I wasn't going to. "You don't get it," I said, taking a deep breath. "You can't just expect me to fall back into line because you say so. You've taken me for granted for too long, and now you have to face the consequences." I watched as the color drained from his face. He had thought, maybe, that he could come over, make a few nice words, and everything would go back to normal. But it wasn't that simple anymore. There was no quick fix for what he had done. For a long moment, he just stood there, the weight of my words crushing him, until finally, he sighed, long and defeated. "I understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. And just like that, the fight drained out of him. He wasn't the confident, arrogant man who thought he could get away with anything. He was just a man who had lost everything. "Goodbye," I said, my voice soft but firm. I didn't need to say more. There was no need to. I turned and walked back into the house, closing the door behind me. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even say another word. He was gone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed. The lesson had been learned, and now it was time for me to move on. In the weeks that followed, I found myself settling into a new rhythm. The silence that had once felt heavy and uncomfortable now felt like freedom. I wasn't burdened by his presence, his lies, his manipulations. I wasn't constantly second-guessing myself or wondering if I was doing the right thing. I had made the decision, and now I was living it. Life had a way of moving forward, whether we were ready or not. My friends noticed the change in me before I even realized it myself. There was a lightness in my step, a sense of relief in my voice that hadn't been there in ages. The weight of his deceit had been lifted, and with it, I could breathe again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself. But that didn't mean everything was perfect. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure what came next. I had spent so much time invested in him, in the relationship, that I wasn't sure how to be alone. The idea of moving forward without him was daunting, even though I knew it was the right choice. Then, one day, I received a call. It was him. I hesitated before answering, my fingers hovering over the screen as the ringing continued. I had cut ties with him for a reason. I had already shown him the door. But I knew, deep down, that this was going to be the final piece of closure. I had to hear it from him, face to face, that he understood what he had lost. "Hello?" I answered, my voice steady but not without an edge. "Hey," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Can we talk? I know it's been a while, but I need to apologize properly. I owe you that." I sighed, leaning back against the wall. His apology didn't mean as much as it once had, but I wasn't going to run from this. Not anymore. "I'm listening," I said, my voice calm but firm. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of him clearing his throat before he spoke again. "I've had a lot of time to think about everything, and I can't stop thinking about how badly I messed up. You were everything to me, and I threw it all away. I'm sorry, truly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know how sorry I am." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. I could feel my emotions swirling, but I didn't want to get caught up in the past. I wasn't that woman anymore. I had learned from everything he had done to me, and I wasn't going to fall back into old habits. "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me," I said, my voice low and measured. "You don't get to take it all back with a phone call. What you did was unforgivable, and the fact that you think you can just apologize and everything will be fine. It doesn't work that way." His silence was deafening. I could tell that what I was saying was finally sinking in. He had spent so much time convincing himself that everything could be fixed, but now he was facing the reality that it couldn't. "I know," he whispered. "I've messed up, and I don't deserve anything from you. But I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. The truth was, I didn't need his apology. I didn't need him to validate my pain or to make me feel better. I had already done the hard work. I had already healed without him, already moved on. His apology was just a formality, something he thought would ease his own guilt, but it wouldn't change the past. "You're right," I said, the finality in my tone unmistakable. "You don't deserve anything from me. And frankly, I'm done listening to your apologies. What happened is over. It's time for both of us to move on." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear the weight of his regrets hanging between us. But I didn't falter. I had made my peace with the situation long ago. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about letting someone back into your life, it was about letting go, for your own peace of mind. "I think this is it then," he said quietly, the words heavy with finality. "I won't bother you again." And just like that, the conversation was over. No more calls, no more text messages. It was done. We were done. I set the phone down, a small sense of relief washing over me. I hadn't expected it to be easy, but it was exactly what I needed. He was no longer a part of my life, and I was finally free. In the weeks that followed, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. I started taking care of me, really taking care of myself. I went for walks in the park, read books I hadn't picked up in years, and spent time with friends who truly cared about me. I took on new hobbies, things I had always wanted to do but had put off for the sake of the relationship. I began to rebuild a life for myself, one that wasn't centered around the idea of being with someone who couldn't value me. As for him, I heard from a mutual friend that he had tried to patch things up with the woman he had been seeing. But it was clear that things weren't the same. She had moved on, too. She wasn't the answer he had been searching for. He had thought he could replace me with her, but he had forgotten one crucial thing: he couldn't escape himself. I didn't feel vindictive, though. It wasn't about him anymore. I didn't care if he suffered. That wasn't my problem. What mattered was that I had learned to be strong, to stand up for myself, and to move forward without looking back. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized something. The past had taught me valuable lessons, lessons that had made me stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I had been through pain, betrayal, and heartbreak, but I had come out the other side stronger than ever. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And that was the lesson I hoped he would learn one day, that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Because in the end, you owe it to yourself to be happy. I raised my glass, not to him, not to the past, but to the future, a future that was finally mine to shape.